when we did backwards running between drills in with rugby players was when I first sort of got onto how good backwards running and walking was. I mean, it radically reduced hamstring and ACL injury.
Yeah.
Radically.
That was Lawrence Van Lingen, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. This week's guest is running and movement coach Lawrence Van Lingen. Lawrence is renowned for helping athletes move better by blending biomechanics, biology, and mind-body concepts into his running and movement training. Lawrence has worked with a wide range of athletes from Olympians and elite runners to everyday movers to help them unlock their best performance. On the show today, Lawrence will break down how movements such as crawling, backwards, and resisted walking drills, as well as foot training, strengthens the human gait cycle. He shares concepts on rhythm, fluidity, and the mind-body connection in running. He talks about the role of curiosity and play in skill building, along with many other helpful ideas in movement performance. Before we get started, an announcement that my new mini course, Sprint Drills Reloaded, is now live on justflysports.com, and you can get it at a special introductory price until July 1st. Sprint Drills Reloaded gives you a comprehensive toolkit on not just the common marching drills, but the full spectrum of sprint patterning and the related specific strength work for speed development. Again, the course is now live on justflysports.com, and I look forward to seeing you on the inside. Let's get to the episode now, 468 with Lawrence Van Lingen. Lawrence, it's great to have you on the show. I know we'll have a lot of great stuff to talk about, so thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. Thanks for the invite. I think we're going to have a great discussion. I really resonate with a lot of what you say, and anytime you're saying something, I'm listening.
I appreciate that, and I really enjoy your viewpoint on running and movement and all the things that you put into that package of running. Coming from a sprints background, or I should say sprints and jumps, and more, I guess, if you look at track, more of that like power side. It's interesting because running and technique, it's not as, it's like we make technique and the sprints to be very simple or seem very simple, I should say. The keyword being seem. And I think in running, you find out very quickly that forcing one thing, you get about 800 meters and you're like, yeah, this isn't working. And you have to start going deeper into the body. And one of the things that I think about a lot, I'd love to get your perspective on this, is watching animals move versus humans run. Like I watch people run around my neighborhood, and you have all sorts, a huge spectrum of different techniques and ways people move. And versus if you watch like a rabbit run in your backyard, pretty much all the same, unless they're hurt. And tell me a little bit about like why do humans move so much differently across the spectrum? What has impacted us from birth that messes up our ability to move, run, locomotion?
Yeah, I mean, I constantly obsess about that as well. I think you need to look at this I look at it from two different perspectives, because one is it's amazing that without any help or guidance, babies learn to crawl, roll on their back, get up onto their own 2 feet and walk and run. And that to me is just such a miracle. It's just incredible. And then, yes, if you look at it with a critical eye, you go like, yeah, they're not doing it all the same or with the same sort of level of aplomb. And, I think in my world, or the way let's say you have a very successful outcome in an intervention with someone, is they will come and their running is not what they want it to be, and they want it to be something better, right? And then generally when you start unpacking what's holding them back or where the limitations are, it's a lot of it's neural, just nerve-based. The Prague School of Physiotherapy, which I, Janda and these guys were just incredible and sort of really thought leaders and ahead of their times. They said muscles are slaves to nerves. And, I really do believe that, like, muscles are totally beholden to your nervous system. So I think at the moment, and certainly I was trained from a very muscular point of view. You study anatomy, you've got to learn the origin, insertion, action of all the muscles. When people are weak, it's a weak muscle. So I think neurologically, I think there's a lot of stuff going on. And then, just accumulated trauma and tissue, adhesions. We just sit a lot, like kids are in kindergarten from the age of 4. A lot of kids have got shoes on before they even out the crib. They're wearing shoes before before they're even crawling because it's cosmetic. So I think a maladaptation to the modern lifestyle is a huge, huge part of it. And it's interesting. It's like what makes one person like a great runner, and they always ran well, and they always had good form, and they never lost it. And you just think like, wow, how, like,
Yeah.
is there a little lucky star
Mhm.
traveling over their head protecting them? Because and but that's what the greats do. And I think the greats really prioritize the performance and function rather than the narrative. And I'm sure in your world, you get people obsessed with how to do it, what should I do, what must I do, which drill works. Whereas people that are really goal orientated, that's all side desserts to the main aim, which is get the job done. And I think we can get very lost trying too hard or trying to correct mistakes at the wrong level and get very frustrated as well. So that's it's a podcast in itself. One question.
Yeah, I just started out. I think sometimes about, well, what are some warm up questions, and
Yeah,
I just dropped the, hey Lawrence, this is what I've been thinking about a lot. So yeah, it is interesting. One of the things I think about this as well sometimes is you get an athlete, maybe they're a sprinter or a runner or just a good mover, and people will say, wow, that person runs really fluidly, like they run like a
yeah,
gazelle or a deer, and they're very fluid. There's usually something about that person, or they didn't get that from a set of instructions from a coach, like 1, 2, 3, do this. It's
yeah,
something that rather resonates almost even down to their personality, I find.
yeah.
Like there's deeper
Yes.
levels that our movement comes from. And I think that's something I think of as well. In addition, I know you do a lot of work with like personality as well, or at least like movement and how we express ourselves. And I'd
Yeah.
be curious your take as well on maybe the human condition and what holds us back when it comes to moving well.
Well, I think people that move well end up um, almost always being very confident in their movement and
Mm,
confident in themselves and able to express themselves and know who they are. Yeah, it's very rare. You're not going to have someone that moves beautifully that's
hmm
massively doubts their process. They'll. I mean, these are complex. Humans are complex. So in one area you can be incredibly insecure, and in another area not insecure.
yeah.
So apparently, I met Tiger, a person that worked closely with Tiger Woods, and they said that's the most insecure human being they've ever met.
Hmm.
Yet no one's thinking that when he walks out on the golf course with his red shirt on. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I was like, "Are you sure about this?"
Mm,
And so from her personal aspect, where she'd met him in, he was really indecisive, and so I don't know. You get this extraordinary parallels where you can be so strong in one component, but generally speaking, if you move well, it's a sense of trusting and knowing and understanding your body, and a level of authenticity. And those kind of people tend to rock what they got. This is good enough. This is who I am. And it's bidirectional, as you start trusting your body. So we'll see personality shifts in people that learn to trust their body in their movement. Let's say you weren't a great mover and you start moving better and better, and you're moving, you do make really big breakthroughs or leaps and bounds transformative, then you'll see that person's personality shift. They become more confident, they can become more grounded, they become more centered, they know what they like, what they don't like. They won't accept things that pull them away from that sort of sense of strength and power. So, I think you can't separate motion from emotion. That's for
yeah.
sure. And but they're great. It's like someone like Michael Johnson. I mean, you know, there's not a molecule in his body that doubts himself. Like
hmm
from the outside, I
Yeah.
don't know him personally, or maybe he sits in dinner and cannot decide whether he
yeah.
wants the steak or the salmon. But generally speaking, there's no sense of doubt in his mind that he was the greatest, he did it the greatest, and he was going to do it his way, and
hmm
his way was the best, and that's that. Done.
Yeah. That's something I think about. I mean, it's so much more on my radar in the last 5 years and really the last two, I would say, than any other time in my life. I'm 41 now, and I think about. Well, I saw this. It was Anna Hall, who's a heptathlete. Funny enough, and maybe this fits with a little bit of our conversation. She does a lot of things well, but she runs a 2:01:800. So that's like, I mean, it's already good. That's good if you aren't a heptathlete. Like that's just a good flat 800, but she also high jumps over 195 or 6'4". Like that it takes a lot of
Yeah.
elasticity to do those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but she posted it was a journal. It was a piece of her journal before the last heptathlon or multi events that she did. And one of the things that she wrote, it really resonated with me. And if I would have saw this, I don't know, like 10, 20 years ago, I probably would have bypassed it. But it was something about along the lines of being brave at her takeoff in high jump. And I, it's like once you understand and can potentially see any fear that might show up in your movement, to me, that's a really powerful threshold because especially for explosive things and anything really. But like for me, the big ones, javelin throw has been a big one where if there's any fear in that process of corking your whole body and then launching about a 2-pound spear, there's just I see more and more where there is these subtle lacks of confidence. And I've started to link that to, I will say too, I don't want to get carried away with yammering on about this, but it shows up for me. You mentioned Tiger Woods with like, you could be confident in one area, not in another. Even despite what I just said about javelin and track, I've always been more confident in those things historically. And especially in my 20s, I was very confident with how I high jumped and threw. But I found that team sport was where I was the opposite. I had a lot of doubt. My coach, my basketball coach in high school called me Bubbles because I would drop the ball like passes a lot. And he put glue on my hands one day and all this stuff. But I was even just a few years ago, I'd play like ultimate frisbee, like indoor ultimate frisbee with a group of like baseball players. And it was a lot of fun. But I would see the effects of fear and doubt creeping in, like just dropping easy passes, totally missing things. And you think, well, why am I doing this? Why can't I just play better? And I'm realizing more and more that at the core of that is fear. You're afraid of something. And I feel like the best movers, athletes, in whatever domain, and maybe like you said, that confidence can be so specific. I think that's so cool, that example. But I'm just more and more aware of how being afraid of something can hold you back, whatever the skill is.
Yeah. And maybe fear or doubt, being not sure, and thinking. You shouldn't overthink. If you cut a chicken's head off, it still runs around. So those are your central pattern generators, and I'm doubling down more and more and really working on central movement patterns and central nervous system, because I think it's the precursor. It's how we learn to walk. It's how we learn to get going. And it seems to me that the good movers have very, very good sort of hardware. Like if you looked at, if there were a house and you had an electrical, like an electrician put the wiring in, it's great wiring.
Yeah.
And you're not going to put the kettle on and blow a fuse. And I think doubling down on that, you start to get down to your central authentic movement patterns, and you think less and you move more. Because you can hold a baby up in the air that cannot crawl, and it'll run on the spot. So we a lot of running or bipedal movement is just totally ingrained in us, and and our heritage from anthropology. We were and reptiles, and we crawled. I'm sort of geeking out on the fact that the back end of our vagus nerve is the dorsal vagus nerve is reptilian and the front's mammalian. And sort of playing around with the differences, because mammals are obsessed with hierarchy, fitting in with the tribe, not getting, in gym, you don't want to be the weakest link because you dropped off the team. And then you start to try too hard and then it makes it worse. Whereas reptiles, they just don't care because they patched out of an egg, and they, so it is interesting. Like central crawling patterns definitely can help you with a mind state shift that's more authentic and doesn't worry about other people as much. And I think it also helps you trust your movement better. And, it's that sort of deep, unshakable trust in your movement patterns that you really want on big occasions. That's what the big athletes have got, So yeah, and I'm way more, I didn't think these thoughts, 15 years ago, that's for sure. And I personally think a lot of it's got to do with social media and total over communication. And also, comparing, thinking, oh my God, these people are doing that and I'm not doing that. So you feel like you have a lack. You don't, people don't trust their process. People have access to knowledge. So there's no more lack of knowledge in the world. Any
Hmm.
knowledge that you want is basically available to you. So if you're a student of the sport, people are like, you meet athletes that almost know more than you,
Hmm.
but they don't know what's important, or what order and sequence to put it in. So that's called experience,
Hmm.
or yeah, that's important, but later, so I don't know. I think people are very fragmented and pulled apart, and it's an interesting space that we're in. To how do you unpack all of that? But that ability, the greats in endurance sports, like the greats have an ability to just absolutely bury themselves without fear of consequence.
Mm.
And they shouldn't do it very often. And, they never do it in training. And, a lot of amateurs like are burying themselves in training and then can't really go to the well in a race
Mhm.
as much as they could, or nerves, or they get anxious and they make mistakes. And, so yeah, it's an interesting point. And I think we similarly aligned is I think a lot of people are overcoached,
I
and have
agree.
too much going on. And so you want very clear signal. I'm quite big on the athlete needs to know exactly what you're doing and focus on one small thing and master it or not. And if not, why not? Because then that often not being able to do something is as telling as being able to do it,
Mm.
but just sort of throwing a whole bunch of drills at an athlete and then they've got to try and figure it out and it doesn't have context or meaning and you
Mm.
don't know
Yes.
something worked, you're not sure which. And, it's very easy to start overthinking and being, get inside your head and you literally need to get outside of your head, and just trust. It's almost like trail running. When you run trail, you mustn't look immediately in front of you. You have to look ahead
Mm.
and let your brain processing power sort of figure out the trail for you, and then your feet will land in the right place. And it's the same with mountain biking. It's the same with driving. Everything, you have to look up. You look past the corner. You look through the corner. So you focusing on not what's immediately happening to you. And I think there's that element in sport. That if you throw that javelin, you've almost got to be seeing through the javelin, throwing with such
Yeah.
total commitment somewhere else. You can't be stuck in the moment thinking, "What am I doing now?" You've almost got to see through the problem totally.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's amazing.
I like what you said, Lawrence, about trail running. And back to like the humans and how we run differently and like the rabbits in my backyard that I occasionally watch. And what if all humans, you mentioned the nervous system and that as a controller and shoes in the modern lifestyle. And you think, well, what would humans look like running if we all grew up walking around barefoot a lot and we joyfully ran trails? I
Yeah,
feel like, how many problems would just disappear just from that? And, absent of all coach technique, absent
yeah,
of all the, do this, that, or the other thing when you run. I'm sure breathing as well, but I think that could fit with the joy. I know you've done a lot of work on the breath, and I hope to get into that here in this conversation. But I think sometimes we don't. There's almost two ways of thinking about how we run or we sprint or we do something technically. And I think it's like on one end we have a set of instructions, and on another end it's like, okay, what's the emotional context, the environmental context, like that.
yeah,
Frank French, he calls it like the long body. It's all those things related to your community and your culture and your belief system. And you as a product of that versus I think we just try to make it so small. And I love what you said too, like, hey, do a bunch of drills and well, I think I got faster. So I hope something in there really worked or the accumulation of all of them worked and that kind of thing. So yes, I like that. That the way of thinking about it is interesting to
I,
me.
I worked a lot in when I was in South Africa with African runners, and
Mm.
I mean these guys. There was no coaching, no drills, and
Yes.
it was very very organic, and it was amazing. I mean, money can't buy the 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 beauty and the elegance and the grace that they move with. And so yeah, I think it is incredibly innate within us. But I think like if you grew up in a traditional Western world, you're very far removed from getting back to it. Like it's not
Mhm.
it to get back home is not as it's not just like I don't have to do drills and I can do whatever I want and it'll be amazing. Like I
Mhm.
think the fact that kids that grow up totally barefoot until they're 10, never see the inside of a car, possibly not that much of a classroom, play, curiosity, run, jump, climb, and then they sort of gravitate to running and genetically are pretty gifted in that department too. It's pretty hard to go back to the source because we're a product of where we are, so you can't. I know a lot of people go to Kenya and try and find the soul and the source of running, and that's amazing. And I think people do appreciate running more or do find some sort of sense of connection. But it's not like, oh, if you go to Kenya, you're going to come back a better runner. That's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, one of the things, there's those videos, I'm sure you've seen them, like the Kenyan running drills. Like the Kenyan comes to like some school and teaches a bunch of kids the running drills. Or I've seen a similar thing with a Japanese elite running school, like their warm up, and they're doing all these drills. And what I think the drills are good, but I think what people miss in there is not just the drills. There's a rhythm, or like the Japanese kids are like chanting as they do it, and there's this community. And even watching Kenyans run, a lot of times, at least what I've seen, like they're running, and I don't know if they're planning on this intentionally, but they're always just in the rhythm of the guy next to you. Like they're always running stride per stride. They're mirroring rhythms. So it's like there's these pieces of rhythm and community that go beyond. Yeah, I think the drills are cool, but like there's more. There's something that's deeper.
Yeah. Well, rhythm also taps into like metronomes. Like that's kind of my pet peeve is a metronome, because metronome staccato, and it's exactly the same. So it's
ding ding ding. Yeah.
The rhythm implies da, 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 variation.
Yes.
And as they breathe in, you have a different muscle tension, and as you breathe out, you have different body tension, and also we copycat learners. So when you're running down the road in a group like that, you'll start to assimilate and blend in and move organically with the environment. You'll blend in. So like that environment's a great teacher. Yeah. And it is, rhythm is, each step is not quite the same. And I think it's very protective and helps endurance. So you don't break down as much. That's why people can typically run further on a trail without getting as sore than on a hard uniform surface like tarmac. It's not just how hard the surface is, it's also the variation. Each step's a little different, which is fatigue resistant. But if you're breathing, and as you breathe in, you sort of open up, and as you breathe out, you're going down and your breathing is soft and relaxed. Each step's a little different, and that I think it saves muscles, and then also that ties into heart rate variability. So as you breathe in and out, the pressure in your heart changes, and the feedback on the heart changes, and so you have heart rate variability, which is a sign of more parasympathetic regulation. And if you're gasping or panting or you have no heart rate variability, and it's not likely that you have rhythm. So it is interesting. Like if you want to run a marathon, or be able to run cross country, which is varied terrain, you have to be supple, adaptable, flexible, have rhythm. Yeah. You don't want to get tired. In Africa, they have a lovely saying. It's like, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with friends.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I love that.
Hunt in a pack.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said about the metronome too. And I mean, being from like the sprints and jumps side of things, it's like metronome, like what's that? And then I've been working more with runners in the past like 3 or 4 years, and this actually wasn't born out of running. I do know some sprint coaches who have like tried to work hertz, but because a sprint is pretty fast, I mean, it's over 4 hertz. Like it's very, I mean, doing 180 beats per minute is already like kind of like, okay, like you said, it can get boring and monotonous, and it doesn't feel very alive necessarily. And then
it creates a lot of tension.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. 100%. And then try to crank that to 240 or 250 or 260, and the amount of tension in your body to hold that together is unbelievable. So what I found. And I still, there's still tension in this, but it's interesting with like music and 4 counts. Randy Huntington, who's a track coach, I just heard him. I don't even think he was on this podcast several times, and I don't think he talked about this on this podcast, but he talked about something called a soundbrenner, which is like it's like a little wearable metronome you put on your wrist or your forearm. And so I'm like, all right, I'll try it out. And I knew nothing about anything of the sort, really, like distance or sprints or otherwise. But one of the things that Soundburner does is it does a 4 count. So it's like, dit, 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 and every fourth it hits pretty hard. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I can do 4. Like I can hit every fourth stride. But if it's, and even that though, is like you said, it's still a lot of excessive. Like my stride length is never as long doing that. The only way I can get it to really work is if I do it, and let's say I do it for 50 meters and I turn it up to 4.3 hertz or something. And then I have to release myself of that rhythm, of that, forced rhythm. And I have to just let my body turn over. And then you feel kind of almost the chains of all the little co-contractions trying to stay on. And then you can just be free. And then I'm like, now that actually now I feel the timing come in and I can integrate this. But I don't know. I just think it's interesting that spectrum of like very robotic and precise, and that being an example of it where you could actually get too precise, so much so that the body is excessively contracting just to hold it together.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, metronome's not an absolute no, and there's a very good place for it in sort of some pogos or maybe single leg rehab, because you can help people increase their tempo, and you're gauging sort of almost like the dose of training they're getting. But generally speaking, if you want to work with someone and help them with movement and show up with their best movement, they need to be relaxed. And as soon as you put them under time pressure, that's gone. And I think a good example, we play around with the guitar, and like if you can only do chord changes at 60 beats per minute, telling someone to do chord changes at 80 beats per minute is not likely. It's going to be noisy and messy, and 110 it's going to be out of it. And the person then feels frustration, inadequate, trying too hard, straining, all of that. So, but I think if you become very, very, very good at your chord changes at a slower tempo, then it's appropriate to sort of play faster tempo music, and you might fail a bit, then take a break and then come back to it. But it's all, you've really got to approach all of this from a position of security and safety. We're doing breath work now, and I say to people, like, you cannot have anxiety about breath work. You have to always play from a position of safety and security, because you need to relax into your breath work. And I love that, because it's such a powerful teacher of kind of, I think the point you're trying to make is like, you have to relax into competence and let go to express yourself. And when you're forcing and trying too hard, it just doesn't work. And there's no sport in the world where, you go play golf, grip the club too tight and see how good it, see what happens. It's that relaxed competence and finding like being really competent and then slowly building up. Whereas a lot of people, I think, are too ambitious or try too hard, or it's something I say often is like credit cards ruined us. It's like you want that holiday because you're working so hard, but you haven't earned enough money to pay for it, so you're going to buy it on a credit card. It's like the dream you want so badly and you feel you deserve it, but you're not doing what's applicable for you now. And like life's not poker. You have to play the hand that you've got. You can't bluff. Well, not with movement. Some people bluff their way through the world, but when it comes to movement, it's like really thinking clearly about what it is that's holding me back and what can I do in this moment at that time, and immersing yourself in that is the quickest way. And a lot of people are just one step or two steps ahead of themselves. And metronome's a very, very good example. If that's too much for you, or you're working too much on cadence, you can blow up the other way radically, which is interesting.
Today's episode is brought to you by Hammer Strength. Throughout the history of this podcast, many coaches and guests have talked about the value of machine-based training as the most simple, straightforward, and more ground, to take a concept from Pat Davidson, way to deliver a powerful stimulus to muscle tissues. Hammer Strength has earned its reputation over decades, not just for durability and build quality, but also for designing machines that move in tandem with natural human arcs and movement mechanics. When it comes to effective solutions in machine-based strength training, Hammer Strength delivers, and I'm excited to have them as a sponsor of this podcast. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the hopping piece there. And it reminds me of, I always remember this from track meets or college indoor track for some reason, because there was always music on in the warm-ups, and you'd almost always see people doing all their marching and skipping drills. And a lot of people, especially the more fluid movers, they would almost always just fall into whatever the beat was for those drills. But those are a lower cadence or lower frequency. And like you said, with the frequency of the chord changes, there's a manageable, okay, I can switch chords here easily. It makes me think about, well, at what hertz is it basically impossible for a human to keep switching? It seems like lower pace stuff under 3 hertz, maybe under 2 hertz, something like that. If I'm doing more march based stuff or maybe lunging stuff, and I do really like, hopping, single leg hops, running drills, all that stuff to like whatever music's on. If it's 120, 130 beats per minute, that seems very natural and fluid and pretty simple. Yeah, similar to hopping, but it's interesting to think about, well, okay, at what point is this no longer manageable? And then what system has to get switched over to maintain a sense of rhythm? It's like a more of an internal thing at that point, and that's where the awareness, it's harder to describe how you get that internal awareness at that point. Maybe that's that. I think that's where you could say mastery comes in. But it's interesting to think about where we switch from mechanical to things that an external source can't do for us anymore.
Yeah, there's this perception of time and sort of putting everything you've got into the moment. So from big data studies like at work-related disorders, if you put, I think that there's a big study done, 10,000 people, right, on Costco workers. And because they're extraordinarily stressed, they measured on how much, basically their throughput, right? If you put people under time pressure and they have to perform tasks and they don't have enough time, their lower back and their traps immediately tighten up. And it's just universal, and they'll basically get trap pain or lower back pain. So if you're working with athletes, you don't really want their lower back and their traps to tighten up. So I'm not saying I'm not saying it's a hard no, but just recognize that there is a consequence to what you're doing. And are you going to antidote it afterwards? Are you going to take that tension back out? Are you going to pull back and go back into the real safe, secure zone, and then dabble, like play in your competence zone and then dabble out and then bring it back in? And I think that there's a lot where that's not happening. It's like, in running, there was this narrative, you have to run with 180 steps a minute. And I get it, tissue contracts and relax at 3 hertz, and it seems like amazing. But, to dogmatically say to someone that that's the number, yeah. And it's interesting is as your mechanics improve, as your tissue elasticity improves, as your foot strength improves, as you move better, as you get more confident, when your nervous system relaxes. And, we know nervous system, like your HRV scores are really high. People are confident, they're trusting, they're still stopping to have this apprehension of always being injured. Typically, their run cadence improves, But it doesn't mean to say that if you improve your run cadence, that your heart rate variability is going to improve, yes, we want less ground contact time, but how we get about that is interesting. And one of the things that I'm quite big on now is like your parasympathetic and autonomic nervous system. You have sympathetic, which is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Parasympathetics, rest or digest. But I like to say curiosity and play. And neuroplasticity requires play and curiosity. And when you're in a parasympathetic mode, you tend to be curious. And a lot of people are guarded, defensive. And in our space, it's pretty extraordinary how aggressive people can be of each other's and their techniques, and how we should and shouldn't move, and what rehab we should do. It's not like people can get pretty aggressive and pretty guarded and defensive about this is the way I do it, and this is the only way. And it always springs to mind that they're not exactly curious or playful or open-hearted, and then that speaks more to the state of their nervous system. And when you're in a chronic state of distress, it's very hard to think clearly and see the big picture and have a sense of curiosity and plan what if.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you're that coach, then your athletes will be the same, because you'll just attract like magnets. You know what I mean? Like, I work, triathletes can be quite an uptight bunch, and I don't work with many. I work with very good ones or very damaged ones that want to get put back together again. Because they don't want a sense of play or curiosity or figure it out, Yeah. Just tell me what to do. And I'll do it.
Yeah. I that's one of the most interesting things I've found with coaching is I've been fortunate to have some really good mentors with motor learning and swimming. The world of swimming. I was never a good swimmer, but actually one of the things you mentioned, curiosity and play. Like if I get in the water, like if my kids are playing at the pool and I'm, I'm like playing Marco Polo with him. And then I'm just like, I'll mess around and just do a few laps like periodically. And it's just like a chance to play. It's like, okay, I'll try swimming with my fists closed and then open them, and wow, notice the difference. And just, or even like my feet, I'll dorsiflex my feet and try to swim and just see and notice what happens. It's just always that state of curiosity and play has totally changed the way that I would approach something that otherwise I wouldn't have been very good at. And it's almost the only way I can like really enjoy that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, for someone that's listening, it's like, well, maybe I want to add more curiosity or play. What does that mean? These are foreign thoughts or concepts. Like the easiest way is Goldilocks. Too hot, too cold, just right. So exactly, clench your fists and then open your hands and spread your fingers. Make your hand hard, make your hand soft. And so and then your brain compares and contrasts, and it's pretty efficient at finding
Yes.
what's more just right. And you start to get a sense of, I like this more than that, and that's the safest way to introduce play is Goldilocks.
Yeah. I
Get the
love it.
porridge just right.
I call it that's such a better word than I always call it polarities, which is so not in touch. I feel like it's like requires like a more explanation. 'Cause I'll talk about that. It's like, okay, well, how tall should you run? Okay, try running really squatted. Now run as tall as you can. Now find something that feels good in the middle of the two, like anything like that. And I love drawing those out. And sometimes I'll do it and I won't even say try to figure it out. It's just you kind of notice what happens when athletes just are exposed to those things and then they move on their own. I'm going to
Yeah.
keep that Goldilocks thing. It's a lot better than my phrasings of some of these concepts.
Yeah, because polarity speaks a bit more to
Mm.
binary, like
Mm.
one way or the other,
Yeah, I
I
like
would
that.
imagine.
So when you, Lawrence, so if based on a lot of this, so you have someone who comes to you and they say, Lawrence, I need to run better. And maybe they're not a triathlete. I don't know. Maybe, or they are. What is your order of operations in terms of like, where do you start with? Because I think a lot of people would come to a coach and say, instruct me, like, give me some drills, some tips, tell me some things to do. And yeah, I'm curious where you start, or at least what your first principles are when you're starting
Um,
with a runner or working with somebody.
I do a lot of body work. I'm trained originally as a chiropractor, and a lot of the time I treat people in order to be able to run fast, so basically give them the body of a runner.
Hmm.
Um, So, help figure that out. Like you don't have enough range of motion in your hip flexors. Let's open that up.
Mhm.
And then, oh, wow, I like that. Run better with more range of motion in my hips. And sort of playing that game. So a lot of the time it's through treatment and then movement relating to treatment. So saying, okay, we've created more space in your body. You might not really know what to do with it because if you did know what to do with it, you'd have more space in your body. Form follows function and function follows form. So you can have a look at someone's body and you can, you know, pretty quickly realize whether they're a really good runner or not, just based on what's showing up on the table. Like how much hip extension do you have? How much sort of ease and length are there in your hip flexors? What like just the body shows on a big picture, if someone's like a power lifter or someone's a marathon runner just because the bodies are very, very different. So, runners or elite runners and really good runners have if you've treated enough of them, you know exactly what they're supposed to be like. They're supposed to walk and talk like a duck, then it is a duck kind of thing. So it's trying to make people more duck-like if you're far removed from being a duck. So that's one way of doing it. And then I really have stepped back with I'm not taking on any more new clients at the moment. In my mind, I'm not arrogant enough to say I've got running totally dialed and I'll never learn something, but I'm actually a little bored with running. um, or stagnant maybe is a better word. So I'm not taking on any more new clients. I want to help many, not few. So I'm going to do a podcast, and I've got an online community that I want to put my time and energy into. Um, but anyway, and then a lot of the athletes I work with remote. I mean, some of my biggest breakthroughs, I've never met the person. The
Mm.
one German guy, I don't know, he took 10 or 12 minutes off his marathon time and won an Ironman, and had an amazing experience. I've never met him. So that would be via remote. It used to be we did like movement patterns that were targeted at unlocking or removing the blockages that that person's got. Now I'm pretty generic. It seems ridiculously simple, and it kind of is a little bit simplistic, but it really, really works. We kind of get people walking backwards using a flow rope. And then I think it's really important that you figure out that in gait, certainly in walking and running, and I think relaxed sprinting, it's knee behind hip is where the power is developed. And I don't think there's many exercises in the world that help that. So I think there's a very poor correlation or very poor translation from gym strength or drills into running and sprinting because they're not close to specific enough. So we do resisted walking, which is walking with a tire, where you can really exaggerate hip internal rotation and extension and downward translation at the same time. Because basically you want the pelvic complex to sort of translate down because you just get much more out of your step. And also you want this notion of trying to get your movement to start from the center and move out. So if you're walking with a tire as resistance, walking doesn't necessarily stimulate your glutes very much, but walking with resistance does.
Yeah.
So you're doing this exaggerated stomp, and it's incredible. It just opens people's hip flexors up, their breathing opens up. You see their sort of chest lift, their fascia relaxes. So, and a lot of people get really, really confident. Oh, that's what I'm supposed to be doing when I'm running. So now my formula is for many, and it's really simple, and it's you get a whole lot of people across the line, maybe not perfectly. And then I work with, a couple of really elite triathletes and runners. And then it's case by case because you start to realize just how individual they are. So it's very much like, what does this person need at this moment, at this time? So I don't know, it's difficult, but I'm certainly don't work the traditional way. I don't have a squad and do drills. I used to do core power classes and strength classes for rugby players and for some sprinting athletes and swimmers. But now it's just, when I came to America, I basically didn't re-license as a chiropractor for quite a few reasons. But so I ended up just doing body work and I couldn't do rehab. So I ended up focusing really on soft tissue and very, very small movements that I could teach in a table, or which opened a whole world for me. Like I couldn't believe how powerful those things can be, but it was tough for people. You really had to buy and you had to sort of double down. Now, like I said, with big picture, I'm very big into crawling patterns. I think the central crawling patterns are just phenomenal at creating structure and organization and putting elements into your movement that you can trust. And from that sense of trust, then the doors start opening. But a lot of it is solve movement patterns as high upstream as possible because the consequences downstream tend to fall into place, whereas a lot of people, I think, play more whack-a-mole, like, oh, your elbow's up, put it down. And you have no idea why that elbow's up. But if you can solve a movement pattern centrally, that elbow just drops naturally. And I think, so I play around like that.
Yeah. I think that, in like coaching or movement education, I feel like that would be a really good strategy in the sense that so often it's just the most downstream thing. It's like you're not cycling your foot high enough, so like pull it up, like a pose method thing where it's a very downstream approach, or I think I want to say that's top down versus bottom up in the pyramid of how we learn. I probably get it confused periodically, but I think about it would be such a good practice for coaches to say, okay, here are some upstream items, such as someone's emotional state. Like how joyful can you make this run with curiosity here, or working with someone's physiology. And I remember, and I think it changes the more background in physiology you have. I think you can't help but look at running and human movement differently because you see things under the hood and how it impacts the actual output. I remember when I was coaching it was Wisconsin lacrosse. This was 2007 or 2008. And one of their warm-ups was called the Seagrave warm-up. I think it was named after Lauren Seagrave, an American track coach. And it was just like they would do 10 air squats and do a sprint build-up. And then they do 10 lateral lunges and do a sprint build-up, and 10 forward lunges and a sprint build-up, and so on and so forth, like all these different movements. And the only way I thought about that back then was, oh, you're getting extra body weight strength and you're getting speed. And then 10 years later plus, it's like, oh, no, that's also designed so you can explore the links between physiology and movement. And I remember one of them, because I was just doing it and no one said do it and think about the links.
Yeah.
But I remember I was doing one of those. It was just lying on your chest and doing scorpions where your legs are like going over the top behind you. And
Yeah.
every time I would come off of that and run, I always felt like $1,000,000. I think I got like at least 5 to 10% faster, like instantly. And it was always that one. And so, like, whatever that does is exactly what I need to have happen. But it makes me think about like focusing on throwing some upstream things in the system and seeing what happens first before just assuming you know the answer downstream. If that's
Yeah.
the first
And
principle.
and um yeah, and I'd say like you talk, top down. I'd say it's reactive. You end up coaching reactively. You're always reacting to situation, and if you react to things constantly, you're not going anywhere. So it's not a great long term strategy. Just but you need a ton of thoracic mobility to run and sprint well, and I think that's generally in someone with a restricted body, that's what shows up last is thoracic mobility, and it's thoracic rotation. Like rotation happens basically in three parts of your body: in your thoracic spine, in your hips, and in your forefoot or your midfoot. And if you lack, so that's it. Like if someone comes to me, that's one of the first things I'm looking at. Do you have forefoot to rear foot mobility? Do you have proper foot mechanics? Do you have adequate rotation in your hips, and can you use it? And then do you have thoracic mobility? And if you have a lack of rotation or transverse movement, like Jay Deshary says, running is twisting. If you have a lack of rotation in one of those segments, it's going to rotate somewhere you don't want it to. And it's one of the reasons we have so many labrum tears and knee blowouts and low back pain, because you don't have enough range of motion where there should be. And I just don't think a lot of people have a strategy to say, like, for me, it's like, I've told people that you should not run one step. And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, like, we can sort this out really quickly and then you can run, but you should not be running like this. And no one's ever said, like, mechanically, you're in a place where you shouldn't run. You're just battling through it and doing drills and doing what you can and can't do. And it's interesting. Like a lot of people, I just don't think it's as clear in their mind, like, what are the checklists of healthy running? Like, what is it that you need to have in your body and have access to in order to run injury free and run well? And I've certainly got some hard no's. Like, if you don't have enough internal rotation in your hip and extension, you should not be running. I didn't make the rules. I'm just telling you, there's going to be bad consequences and you can work around that. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't. In people that have a big restriction in their joint, and certainly in the Western culture, and you're kind of rigid and guarded, and you think you can strengthen your way out of this, or if you look at Paralympics, like you have hard problems that you have to learn to move around. And I love watching Paralympics or challenger athletes, because you can just see, like, I don't have a leg. How am I going to move? I don't have a calf muscle. How am I going to move? I don't have an arm. How am I going to swim? And it's extraordinary how well they compensate and how well they do with what they've got. Whereas someone that doesn't have enough healthy hip range of motion and or function in that hip, and is guarded and defended and wants to be strong and stable and is trying to sort of like make themselves run, they're not the kind of person that's going to say, oh, I'm totally going to swing my hip around and move around the situation and learn to deal with what I've got. So it kind of ends up being a hard no. It's not an absolute no, but it's very unlikely that this person is going to say, oh, so you mean I can just run down the road and just swing my leg around? That's not very likely to happen. And it's not a strategy that I suggest, but it is interesting, is like how our mind just traps us and pulls us into a place, and the solution that we want is there and available to us, but a lot of the time not because of the way we think or see the world.
Hmm. Yeah, I like I had a thought. I'm trying to search for
I took too long.
that's okay. No worries at all. I I'm trying to think of where I even was. I want to go. I don't know. I was going to get to like backwards running because you got me on backwards running and pulling a tire and some simple solutions with that. And then I was also thinking about the way we process movement, and for some reason something got crisscrossed. I apologize for that. And maybe it'll come back to me. This does happen from time to time. But I did want to kind of on the talk of that upstream. And I know you mentioned the tire, you've mentioned the backwards walking. And I find it interesting because I think sometimes in the modern day, people are almost afraid of solutions that seem so simple. Like obviously you can get really complex with how you look at the body and movement and things like that. But at the same time, your the actual exercise is at its core, it's a pretty simple thing. Tell me a little bit more about, and I did remember that thing I was going to say now, but I'll say it for later. But tell me a little bit more about like the tire walking and the backwards walking, or any progressions there. Just because I think especially backwards walking can be taken for granted because sometimes it's like, okay, well, let's get more complex with these forward things, but then you forgot backwards. and I just think there's a lot of power there. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about some of that Gait specific strength, the tires and the backwards movements.
Yeah, so I think backwards walking is almost so if you walk forward with a tire with resistance, you have to do it like there are some rules, there are some constraints. You try and leave your heel on the ground, and it's better to learn on an incline of about 6%. So it's actually much easier to teach someone this, or for them to figure it out on a treadmill with a 6% incline. You just tie a couple of TheraBands around the waist, anchor it to something behind you. And it's basically to put the step back into your gait. I think in North America, it's coached. You do a lot of B skips, and there's a lot of people that hit the ground backwards in endurance running. And I personally just don't think it's sustainable. You need to land in a connected leg, store elastic energy, and then you need to step out of that. So once the knee is behind the hip, you need to straighten your leg. And you can teach that pattern in the tire. So with tire walking on an incline, you're just stepping, and your heel stays on the ground, and you're teaching the hip internal rotation. So you're almost developing like torque in your hip. So it's a torque power. There's a twist out of your hip that screws your foot down into the ground as it lengthens, and the elastic energy that you're storing in your body for running happens with torque, with twist.
Yeah.
We're not origami or folded. So that's and tire walking is amazing. It really, really opens up your sort of pelvic bowl, your iliacus and your psoas muscles, and releases them. And like a lot of people, their breathing improves, their HRV improves. There's a lot that goes on, and a lot of people find so much relief in their hips and lower back. It's crazy. So we love resisted tire walking. To your point, a lot of people are too embarrassed to do it.
Yeah.
What will people think? And it's like, who cares? And when you walk that tire with aplomb and gusto and you mean it, people stop and say, "Is that good? It looks amazing. What's it for?" It's so impressive. No one's judging you. But anyway, and then backward walking was actually the things that that's sort of almost like the list of what we want to show up in your running suddenly had to appear in your running. A lot of people get injured. So let's say you were a 4-foot runner or a pose runner where you sort of shortening your hamstrings through your gait cycle. And now you're lengthening your hamstring and using your hamstring as a spring. And sort of there's almost like your heel stays longer on the ground, and you're almost delaying the load of the spring and then propelling you forward so that the vectors are launching you forward rather than up and down. I mean, I totally get running is vertical force. It's how hard you hit the ground down, but it's great if the vector of the energy release is in a forward motion or slightly more forward, right? So backward walking initially became, well, we want to keep that heel on the ground. We want to put length through the Achilles. So I would put people on 2 weeks of backward walking before we did tire walking. Because one is you can learn contralateral movement backwards. And if you have it backwards, you've got it forwards. Whereas a lot of people, just because you can contralaterally walk, and contralateral, by that I mean your belly button faces your lead leg as you walk. So backward walking, once you can do contralateral gait backwards, you can immediately do it forward. It really opens up your hips. You sort of lengthen out your Achilles. Your calcaneus drops down out of your ankle. So that range of motion, now you've got a longer elastic or greater elastic potential out of your calf Achilles complex, which really, really helps with running economy and efficiency. And then also it helps you mobilize your feet. So you're going soft toes, heel
Yeah.
down, and you start to get forefoot mobility. So we really like backward walking for those reasons, but it's more of a prep for the forward tire walking, which will end up with you with more downforce, hitting the ground harder. And so it's kind of like a door opener for the two. But the backward walking tends to bring, it's taken on a life of its own. It's like viral or meme, like people are like, oh my God, everyone's walking backwards. And I'm like, yeah, but you really want to get to walking forwards.
Mm-hmm.
But it really, really works. And I think it's because it ends up being play and curiosity, and it opens up your peripheral vision. And we're so forward facing, we're staring at screens. So I think it brings a lot more to the table, and it really helps people get, we talk about the credit card, sort of having this head forward, anticipatory, you're ahead of yourself all the time. You walk backwards, you're grounded, your head comes back, you start to get stacked, and you start to become more in the moment. So I think there's a lot more to backward walking than I initially thought. It's like a little gift.
Yeah. Yeah. The more you explore it, I think the more you find with it. I know for me, it's interesting. I remember 12 years ago was my first exposure to just like backward sled walking, but it was like, super like strongman type, put 8 plates on the sled and just haul it. And you get a, massive quad burn. And that was all it was about. It was just the quad burn.
Yeah.
And if I only associated it with that, I mean, it was great for that. But I think if I only associated it with that and stopped there, I would have stopped doing it. And so I did. For a while, I didn't really consider it. But once I started looking at it again and started feeling like a lot of the things you're talking about, I'm like, man, I just feel good the next day. Like something in my body feels better with the sled. And I remember I was backwards running one day too. And it was just funny because I had some Achilles issues. And so I turned around and I'm going backwards. And for how I was doing it, I was not letting my heel drop in that situation, just kind of keeping the ankle at 90, so the Achilles doesn't stretch. But I was just thinking, I was like, wow, this actually feels way springier for some reason, because I'm basically just pushing off my transverse arch repeatedly. And I was like, I was really liking it. And then the next day, I think I beat it up a little too much, like the bones were a little tired. But it just got me thinking about all the things. I'm not saying people should go run backwards like for 400 meters, like off the tiptoes or anything like that. But I did find it interesting because there's pieces of the human spring system that also get activated with different variations of moving backwards. And where it culminated for me this year was in track. At the end of jumps practices for track, we started doing a lot of cool downs, and I took this from I think I saw this in like Bob Thurnhofer. He's a track coach and was on the show. He has like general strength libraries of movement, and one was like just a bunch of backwards working movements in a cool down. And it's like backwards hops and backwards skips and backwards runs, and incorporating that stuff to cool down has been nothing but good. And it's like, if I would have just kept with the quadriceps theme, I never would have got there for all the other items that type of thing brings up. So I just think it's great. I think sometimes too, I don't know, like, you like you said, if you see like backwards walking everywhere and it's so ubiquitous, you almost want to like rebel against it and not do it because it's like too trendy. And so I think I had to fight that a little bit. I had to fight that a little bit. So, but I'm there now.
I don't think backward walking is there yet. But it's really interesting. Like, so when we did backwards running between drills in rugby with rugby players was when I first sort of got onto how good backwards running and walking was. I mean, it radically reduced hamstring and ACL injury radically. And it puts a lot of goodness into your hamstrings. And I think doing it at the end of sessions is a really, really good idea, and a little bit in warm-ups. And if you're in team sports, if you're not jogging backwards, you're missing out on. And then that's with you healing the ground, just sort of jogging backwards as recovery. You're missing out on that would be low-hanging fruit right there.
Yeah.
Just introduce a little bit your players' spatial awareness, their sense of position will open up, their peripheral vision will open up, and it's really, really good for sort of your posterior chain or your hamstring calf length and function. But I don't think it's that viral. I think just in my little world, there's a lot of people walking backwards. It's certainly it's not mainstream.
Yeah, I was just thinking about like there was some Ben Patrick, Andrew Huberman little thing like 2 years ago or 3 or whatever it was, and they're walking backward sled walks on the beach or something. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
I feel like in
Well,
strength and conditioning, it's
so
common.
when you pull a sled, I mean, one is you know, like I say, I'm way more immersed in muscles are beholden to
Mhm.
nerves, and I'm
Yeah.
way more interested in nerves. You know, like you cut a nerve to a muscle, and that muscle disappears in 48 hours. It's gone.
Mm,
It's like a river's cut off. Like the plant dies. The decrease in bulk in a muscle, if you sever a nerve, is so radical and so quick, it will
mm,
blow your mind. Okay. And if you could reattach the nerve, that muscle will just come back almost instantaneously. I mean, and I think that's one of the most powerful sort of things to think about, that muscle, its tone, its strength, its reactivity, its function is 100% reliant on a nerve.
mm,
It is not the boss. Okay. You know, for me, I just go nuts when people are constantly trying to strengthen muscles and worry about muscles and weak muscles. Like, why is the muscle weak? It's being inhibited, or it's not being used, or it's not being allowed to use. You know, those are the sort of the deeper questions that you have to ask. But interesting enough, when you pull a sled backwards, you'll pull it
mm,
with homolateral gait. Your pelvis will rotate as a block back this way, and then it'll rotate as a block back that
mm,
way. And because there's so much tension that you block your movement, so it's actually very difficult to pull a sled backwards with resistance in a way that's beneficial for hip function related to gait. I mean, there's no such thing as a bad exercise,
mm.
but if you think heavy backward sled pulling is going to help your running, you know, I don't think it might block your running more than it helps your running.
Mm. Yeah. So you're saying when you load it up heavy, like your hips kind of work, they orient side to side as I'm making this motion on my
Yeah.
screen, like versus
Yeah.
reciprocal, like where they're kind of,
Yes.
it's more of this block like
Yeah.
situation.
I think because you create so much tension in your hips that
Hmm.
the muscles sort of grab and lock, and now you don't have a functioning pelvis.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, my backwards walks with weight. I remember back in the day at Cal, it was like, all right, 7 plates and like Quad Burn City. And yeah, if you
Yeah.
want to get strong quads, it was pretty cool. But I usually just go 2 plates these days. It just feels better. I don't know how to describe it. Sometimes my children jump on the sled. Well, it's not even a sled. It's just one of those spud.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
got this
Yeah.
idea from Jeff Nichols and his gym. Like it's just like this mat that sits on the grass, and I just pull it with TRX straps, and then sometimes my kids will jump out and they'll jump on the plates and get a ride on it. But it's there is that feeling of like, okay, this 2 plates feels pretty good. Like there's something that feels still relatively loose moving through this, and maybe I'll just
Yeah.
go a little farther and I'll superset it with some other things like push up variations and kind of type thing. But yeah, for some reason, I'm not like rushing to throw all my plates on there for sure. It just
Yeah.
doesn't feel
And
quite as good.
the other dynamic to it is that, you know, with a plate, you tend to lean back. And again, we
Mhm.
actually want your knee behind your hip and
Yeah.
then your heel to hit the ground. We're trying to create
Mhm.
that shape,
Yeah.
knee behind hip, heel on ground.
Mm.
So some people are like, you know, your feet are just in front of you, you're just sort of pushing forward. You know, so like, it's one of my things is like there's so few exercises in the world that are done with your knee behind your hip. Like, so you
Mm.
can do a lunge, but most people lunge, they load the front foot, not the back foot.
Mm.
You know, step ups, front foot, RDLs, inflection, everything's inflection, everything. And generally speaking, humans have had enough flexion to last them several lifetimes by the time they start training. So it is interesting, and gait is extension. And you know, so for me, again, you know, I've never told anyone to walk backwards with resistance.
Yeah. So you're looking at, well, I was just thinking about with the backward sled walk. One of the reasons I do it, I think it's pretty similar to what you're saying, is it was in the light of biomechanist and physical therapist Bill Hartman. He talks about doing things that can push my center of mass back as like a restoration, just because versus being like everything's pressed
Yeah,
forward.
yeah.
Um,
That's also great.
yeah, and so when you are pulling a load, it's like I can let my trunk back. But if, like you said, I lean back, like if we watch World's Strongest Man and they're dragging like the anchor and it's so heavy they have to lean way back, that's totally different. For me, it's like I'm letting my shoulder blades separate. I'm letting my sternum and rib cage come back. So there's this like, and I can get into my midfoot a little bit better. It's a pure rest. It is not propulsive. It's like the opposite of sprinting,
Yeah.
pulling a sled as fast as you can. It's like whatever the opposite of that is, like, that's what I'm doing. And maybe that is a little bit more of a polarity there versus a Goldilocks. But
Yeah, well, you can get different elements out of everything. I mean, that's the beauty of it. They try and take bigger steps with a vertical torso, and you might find like, oh, maybe two plates are too heavy, or maybe not.
mm,
Um, but it is the it's an interesting dynamic. Is like and again, like there's movement is so complex. Like, what is it that you
mhm,
want out? And there's a time and a place. I mean, you walk backwards and you get your quad burn, and because it's so almost eccentric or opposite of what you're doing, you might find you get a ton of range of motion out of your quads. Your knee
mhm.
pain goes away. Then,
Yeah.
of course, it's like the best exercise ever. So there's not. You can get into trouble, trying to, I don't know, have strong opinions about everything. But it is again in I think I'm quite intrigued, like the difference in like in American, they'll try and teach people how to sprint run, and they'll say like
Mhm.
endurance runners should sprint run, and like trying to define what's sprinting and what's running, and the
Yeah.
difference between those two. And I think a lot of people, like in my mind, I break it down like accelerating is one thing.
Mhm.
So coming out the blocks or starting and accelerating up to speed, that should have its own name. Okay.
Mhm.
And then there's running at speed, and hopefully it's cute because then your whole mindset changes. Like, I want to maintain my speed. I know I'm going to slow down. So now you're trying to relax. You're trying to open up. Your whole mind shift. Whereas before, it's just like you say, probably committing with everything you've got, so that there's no inhibition to accelerate up to speed. And then endurance running is about not breaking down, finding rhythm, finding
Mhm.
fluidity. And what defines the difference between those things. And I think it helps guide and change the structure of what you're training and what you want to get out of training a lot, but
Mhm.
backward walking is to help people walk better and endurance run better. The way I sort of present it, it's it's kind of specifically, that's what we're on about, and then there's variations. You can mix it up and do whatever you like.
Yeah. With the tire walking, I don't have a
Mm.
tire sitting around. That'll be my next thing I can have in my garage set up. I like something I just became really fond of. I think's related in many ways. And I got onto this. Julian Pinot is a coach who loves like sandbags, and for some reason, there's like the stars aligned with this one. The base of my driveway is like I haven't measured the grade. It might be like a 10
Yeah,
degree, 15 degree grade at about 20 meters, and I'll just carry the sandbag up and down it, and that's like
yeah,
the best because it's like it's not quite like I don't have that tire vector behind myself,
yeah, yeah,
but something about that, and also letting I'll do a mix, like I'll do some foot flat, like letting my heel stay down while I take the
yeah,
sandbag up the hill, and sometimes I'll run up and be more propulsive and just either way,
yeah,
but using that as my more primary conditioning in these cold Ohio winters, as well as some hill work. I found that my the way I ran when I got to sprinting again, and once I really started getting into sprinting, it was so good. And yeah, I had some good conditioning that was a more specific conditioning, I would say, but there was something that happened in my body that was really positive through all that.
yeah.
Whatever
Do you put
balance,
the
whatever
sandbag on
propulsion.
one shoulder or across your shoulder, or how you hold it?
Oh yeah, so for me, I usually it was actually pretty heavy. I have like an 80 that pound. That's the warm up. I just hold it in front, so it's like you actually have
Okay.
to. It's like it's funny because it's almost less propulsive because it's like running where you're kind of getting pushed forward a little bit more. It's like again, it's like the opposite. So I'm holding it in front, and it's almost like pushing my spine backwards a little bit, which it's almost like a relief from propulsion, if that makes sense. And then I have up to like a 150, and so I'll hold it and do different just walks up the hill and thing, and sometimes backward walks up the hill as well. So
Yeah,
occasionally I put it over my shoulder, but not. Yeah, I should try that actually. That because that is I always find that interesting with what foot internally rotates and the way the way it works with the shoulder on this thing. I'm actually going to do next winter. I'm going to make sure I do that. I've been doing a little bit of that recently, but yeah, I've always
yeah.
find
Well,
that
just let me
interesting
know how you
experience.
go and like what your insights are. But I think if you hold it in front of you, you're connecting your chest to your hips.
Mm,
And because a lot of people, if they don't have great rotation, their upper body will move too much on their torso.
mm,
That's very, very common. So you sort of have an upper body that counter rotates on your hips. And if you hold and stack, you're immediately stacking your lower back and torso. And so where's the rotation going to come from? Probably, it's almost forcing you to use your hips properly,
Yeah.
or deeper, or loading them, or accentuating them, or however you want to play around with those words. But that is, I'm going to try it now. I got a log. I'm going to grab a big log and walk up my 20-meter
Yeah, I love it.
and see what that brings to the table.
I got a log too. It might be a little too big for that. Maybe I'll do maybe a viral video to try it. But yeah, it is. That is true for me. And not to go on a tangent at all, but I as a high jumper, like I'm very elastic. The swinging shank of the shin and the foot, that's like a
Yeah.
superpower for me. Whereas the hips and just the general function loading pattern has always been, I don't get as much natural power out of that. So using that sandbag and kind of taking away in a way that took away the superpower very distinctly just allowed me to work on the other thing and get a lot of quality reps in. And then, occasionally mix in some really fast stuff there, and it was really good. So yeah,
Well, then that's what the tire does. It takes you're not using your calf and ankle complex so
Yeah.
that you're forced to accentuate your hips. So you're creating a constraint to sort of target a certain area. If that's your superpower, make your hips your superpower, or your hips can accentuate. Let's like cracking a whip. The stronger your hips are, the better the downforce. So you definitely want to try and play around with that.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
You're going to go back to competition now.
We'll see. I tell you, if I'm going to high jump, training with a sandbag is not a good idea because you start getting all sorts of muscle in like your obliques and like all in your core in different places. And it's just like, I got to take that muscle over the bar with me. So I'm going to have to stop doing that. I do want to do some masters meets in that. In terms of just general fitness, it's amazing. Like it's the best thing ever. But for the body of a high jumper, it's about the worst thing you could do, I would say in some respects. So, but hey, just closing out, I do want to touch on the feet really quickly. And it's like, oh man, like every other question on this list, Lawrence, would be like a whole like podcast. Like I wanted to talk to you about like pieces of distance running that fit from general locomotion, could go to sprinting. And I was like, that's another podcast. And so just, you mentioned it with the feet, with the backwards walking, but if you had to say, okay, I hate to have these reductionist questions, but if there was just like 2 or 3 things that you would have to say, okay, this is essential for good foot function in running. And hey, 2 or 3 things that I want most runners to at least be familiar with the foot function in running and locomotion. What are your thoughts on
that? You have to have forefoot or midfoot mobility. So your forefoot needs to be sort of mobile in relationship to your calcaneus or your heel bone. I think it's very common for people that have run a lot in their forefoot to have a locked midfoot. And if you don't have movement there, it's not a lot of movement that you need. You're going to have excessive movement elsewhere. And you'll see that show up with people's ankles. They'll often excessively pronate through the ankles. And the ankles should be reasonably stable and a little bit of pronation. So I think that's a big deal. I think the most important thing, working on that, getting your first met head down, which is not the same as your big toe. So you want big toe strength in your medial arch, but the first met head has to come down. So that'll stop like a forefoot varus. And the best way to do that is to stand on a big round rope or a cylinder, so that lengthways, so that your second and third toes on the apex of the cylinder and your big toe can't find anything. And you can sort of stand on that regularly and then march on that and then start doing gentle forefoot raises once you're familiar with that. And that really mobilizes and drops your forefoot down. And then turning the rope sort of sideways and stomping on that will really help your arches. And then I think the notion of getting your calcaneus down out of your ankle, which is like long backwards walking, big steps backwards, where you're going soft toes, then you heel down. It just draws your calcaneus down. And generally speaking, when your calcaneus draws down, you might have, like, let's say, calcaneal inversion, so a twisting in your calcaneus. Generally speaking, when it draws out of your heel, it lines up. And so you can really, really improve your ankle mechanics just very, very simply by getting the first med head down, getting your heel bone out of your ankle is the way I do it, or drawing down further, which is just long, big backwards walking will do it. And I think, then Your ankle alignment's much better. And on your ankle alignment, you need tibial internal rotation to free up your ankle. So those would be the key things, is sort of understand or try and understand that you have to have forefoot mobility. Get the first med head down, drop the heel bone out, have internal tibial rotation. And if you get, that's 4 things. You got a bonus tip there. You get those 4 things right, your hips will improve, your knee alignment will improve, your mechanics, your stability, just everything will really, really improve. It's really critical. We're obsessed with it with athletes. That's what we're always striving for. And sometimes it takes a long time, but it's worthwhile just gently having a practice where you improve that. And, if you don't have functional, healthy feet, it's very, very difficult to run injury-free and enjoy it.
Yeah, with that first Met head, I really like Gary Ward's wedges. And one of the things that I'll mess around with sometimes is I have a little force. It's like a force meter, and I'll push up. A lot of people are familiar with like pushing into a bar as hard as you can, and the force plate gives you a reading. I just have like a climbing. It's meant for climbing finger strength. I'll use it with this thing called a K box, and it gives me, and I'll push with one leg into the K box as hard as I can, and it tells me how many pounds I can push with. And I find my right foot doesn't pronate very well. And so if I put one of those green wedges right under it, like you said, not the first toe, under the Met head, I instantly go up like 50 pounds because it found that first Met head. It's like now you can internally rotate a little bit and put force down into the ground. And I think it's interesting because in the more strength and conditioning world, it's like you see the pounds and you're like, oh yeah, like this is it. And I think so often we just think that distinction, it's like, it's easy to say big toe, push off your big toe, but it's like, your big toe isn't actually that strong. Like I've tried to stand on it. It doesn't hold me up. It's
no, you're going to break it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And try that rope stomping. It gets the big toe down amazingly, and that again with backward walking we used to walk backwards up an incline to force the Met head to come down. So you can walk backwards up your driveway with your sandbag, and your first Met head will start to find the ground because the ground's sort of running away from it. But longitudinal rope stomps gets that Met head down. You just crossways. You stand on a rope crossways, or like we use a big, heavy, thick rope, right? Like a 1.25 inch rope, like a battle rope. And you stand on it sideways and you stand on it lengthways, and you gently do calf raises with it lengthways. It's incredible how much stability, how much your balance improves when you're the sort of the base of your first Met head and the base of your second toe sort of come down and find the ground, and your foot splays and opens up, and you have medial forefoot. You have 33 joints in your foot, but you have more nerve endings in your feet than your hands. They're articulate, mobile, intelligent things. And the force production goes through, and the line of force production is big toe, VMO, glute max. And if you've got VMO issues, your first Met head's not finding the ground. If you battle with hip drive and hip extension, your first Met head's probably not finding the ground.
Yeah. So that rope, the longitudinal, what you mean by that is it runs from your heel right out to the third toe, basically? Like from the front to back.
Hold on. Through the middle, through the miracle of technology. Watch this. We're going to do a camera shift.
Sure. Oh, nice.
So here's the big rope. And then this is longitudinal.
Yeah.
And you want your first Met head to not hit the ground, and it basically will splay your arch. And you can do gentle toe raises or forefoot heel raises on here, but just be very, very careful. It's such a strong stimulus on your forefoot that you can hurt your feet. They might not be as mobile as you think. So you might be stomping on the rope this way for quite a while, and then you stomp on the rope this way.
Oh, I got it. Yeah.
And when you stomp on it sideways, you're trying to sort of stand on the outside of your foot and get your ankle alignment neutrally pocket through the second and third toe.
Got it.
It works like an absolute charm.
Got it. That's really cool.
And it's really interesting is that cycling will bring your toe off the ground, and cycling is flexion, knee in front of hip.
Yeah, I'll have to try that. I've been doing the brutal way. Like I put a small like PVC type pipe, like an inch in diameter, and I just have that sit right in front of my calcaneus going sideways to try to loosen up my midfoot. and it hurts like pretty badly. After that,
No, this feels so good.
yeah, my calcaneus moves well after, but I'll take the rope. Next time I get a
Yeah,
rope,
yeah.
I'm going to try that. Yeah, I love that. And when the rope's going front to back, now what is being mobilized there? Because I view it almost as like a taco. Like you have the rope, and then it's almost like the transverse arch is folding over that
Mm.
rope. Is
Yeah,
like
it
that
opens
kind of
up your
what's
transverse arch and
yeah?
it broadens your forefoot.
Okay.
And then if you're doing toe raises, like or heel raises, if you're going up on your toe, you've got to be very, very careful. So, like, I mean, just don't
Yeah,
give yourself a plantar plate tear, but it gets your toe flexors moving,
I got it.
and you'll see. I mean, just try it. And you go, oh my god, that's extraordinary. That's a really, really strong mobilization.
Hmm.
But once you do it, I mean, the sort of grip strength and the stability in your feet afterwards is crazy. And I mean, you just need like 10 reps, and just try and do you use your force plate and just see the numbers change. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
I'll do that next time, actually. And I'm always looking for things to give that transverse arch a little strength stimulus. So I'll call them
Yeah,
transverse
yeah,
arch
yeah,
curls or transverse arch calf raises. Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so, oh, well, hey, well, thank you so much, Lawrence. I know I probably got halfway through my question list, but I think that's always a good thing. I just love when these conversations go organically, and I really enjoyed talking to you. And man, I'm jealous of all the awesome trails to run out there in Boulder, Colorado. So, thank you for being on the show. I appreciate your time and enjoy the next run and backwards walk and series that you do out there.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.